3, 2, 1.
So, you've probably watched a few times, and if you haven't, there's plenty of videos here on YouTube or TikTok or Instagram, a rocket launch. And so, what is a rocket launch and what happens moments before a rocket launch? Launching something into space is really complicated. It's such a difficult task, which requires so many people working together and every single step to work perfectly in sequence and without any errors. So today I'm going to tell you about everything related to launching a rocket and all the steps leading to the deployment of a satellite or astronauts reaching the International Space Station. So, T-minus 24 hours. This is when the rocket is being assembled. As you might know, the rocket is comprising of different stages or parts. We have the boosters, so the ones at the sides, the two cylinders at the sides. That contains the propellant, and then as the name suggests, they give you the boost to go into space. Then you have the first stage, the second stage, and then the payload. The payload is what we actually want to launch into space, and that could be a satellite, could be humans, could be anything really, anything, even dogs. One day we could have dogs on Mars. I mean, that'd be cool. Anyway, 24 hours before the launch, we have technicians assembling the rockets. That could happen either in the factory or at the launch pad. Depending on what kind of rocket you have and how big it is, some rockets can reach up to 60 meters, so it becomes very expensive and not efficient to transport it fully assembled. And so you just bring pieces and then you assemble it on the launch pad, the tower where the rocket is then launched from. 24 hours before the launch of the rocket, the evacuation of personnel and also inhabitants of nearby cities or town happens as well. And this is when the governments and the private company, in some cases, they have the authorization to launch, and then a notice is sent to all the people nearby. So up to 24 hours probably. This is done 40 hours before, sometimes even weeks before. Depending on the complexity of the launch and the trajectory of the rocket, more people might be evacuated. And then T-minus 12 hours, we have the power-up systems. So this basically means that the rocket is turned up for the first time as a whole. And so the onboard computer makes sure and checks that all the subsystems are working correctly. So for example, all the electrical systems or the hydraulic systems, ensuring that the communication with the ground control is happening as well. And so this is what happens at T-minus 12. T-minus 12 is also a really important time frame because it's when the first weather report happens and arrives to the ground control. So weather is really, really important and critical when we launch a rocket into space, because heavy lightning or high speed could compromise the trajectory of the rocket or could even damage the rocket itself. And so we need to ensure that we can launch the rocket in the safest conditions possible, especially when it comes to launching astronauts into space. However, the weather report, the first one comes after at T-minus 12, but you have weather reports coming throughout the entire pre-launch and launch windows. T-minus 3 hours is when the propellant is being loaded into the rocket. And so some rockets use solid fuels. If that's the case, they get pre-assembled, pre-fueled at the factory. But if we have liquid fuel, then it is loaded on the tower 3 hours before launch. For SpaceX Falcon 9, that can happen up until 10 minutes before launch. Other rockets probably within the 3-5 hours before launch. So it's very variable. This is also when, if you watch a launch video, you'll see some vapor, some white smoke coming out of the rockets. That's not dangerous, that's nothing major. It's just the condensation of the liquid oxygen. It's very cold, and then it comes out of the rocket and it condensates, and basically you'll see it as a white smoke. Quite interesting, because if you don't know about it, you may think something's wrong. And then we have one of the coolest phases of the pre-launch phase. At T-minus 10 minutes, we have the flight readiness poll. And basically, this is when, during the sequence, you'll hear people saying, propulsion, go, electrical, go, mechanical, go. And this is basically for all the subsystems involved in the launch of the rocket to confirm whether it's ready to go to launch into space or not. So if there's any problems, now this is the right moment to say not go, and in probably just go and have a look, ensuring that the problem can be fixed before the actual launch into space, because at that point it might be too late. Then at T-minus 1 minute, the onboard computer takes control of the whole rocket. And so this is when the rocket can be controlled by people anymore, so there's no human errors involved in this anymore, and the onboard computer makes sure that everything is still working, and it has about 50 seconds before the countdown starts to solve any issues, any problems, and flag anything to the people who then would, ensure that everything's fine. Then T-minus 10 seconds, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, liftoff. This is the most exciting part because you can start seeing the excitement of the people who have worked on the rockets. You can see the people who have the payload, who worked on the payload, being excited because the payload is finally going into space. And if we have astronauts on the rocket, it's even more exciting because literally there's humans on the rocket who are about to go to space. Mind-blowing. And so this is when you'll start seeing the flames and sparkles, and it gets very bright and noisy. This is one of the best moments ever, honestly, during a rocket launch. But this is not over. This is probably one of the most critical phases of launching something into space. At T plus 10 seconds, we have what we called gravity turn. This is when the rocket is being controlled by the onboard computer and its trajectory is being adjusted to make sure that it's going towards the right direction. And so this is when you see the rocket going up and then slightly turning. The turn, the tilt, ensures that the rocket can reach its orbit successfully, because otherwise, if we send the rocket straight up, once it reaches space, it will just continue going straight. And so this is a meticulous job that the onboard computer has to do to ensure that we got the right angle, the right tilt, to ensure that we can reach the designated orbit. This is very complicated, but also so exciting. T plus 80 seconds, we have the rocket becoming supersonic. So the rocket is now gaining velocity, and it gains more and more and more velocity, so that to the point that it reaches the speeds of sounds, and it goes even faster than that. And so it becomes supersonic. At T plus 90 seconds, the rocket enters the max Q phase, which is the area of the atmosphere where the pressure is so intense that the rocket has to burn more fuel to gain more thrust, to gain more velocity, and win over the gravity and the air drag. And so this is very critical because anything can happen here. Some rocket failures do happen at this stage, but nowadays we worked hard, so companies can do a really good job overcoming this pressure and air drag. At T plus 3 minutes, we have the MECO sequence, or the main engine cutoff. At this point in the sequence, the boosters of the rocket have exhausted all their propellants and they are detached from the body of the rocket. This helps the rocket becoming lighter and even faster. Shortly after MECO, at T plus 4 minutes, we also have the first stage separation phase. And this is when you'll see the first stage of the rocket, the big part of the rocket, being separated from the rest of the rocket. And this happens because we now reached a certain speed and we don't have any fuel anymore in that area of the rocket, and so having more weight is just going to drag the rocket down, and we need to become even lighter and even faster. And so for some rockets, for example the SpaceX Falcon 9, you'll see that the first stage is then returning back to Earth, landing successfully on a platform in the ocean or somewhere else on Earth, and that first stage can then be reused for a second launch or a third or fourth one. This is really interesting. This is really good because it drives cost for launching things into space down, as we can reuse stuff rather than just let it burn into the atmosphere and having to make it again and again and again. And so after the first stage is gone, the onboard computer starts the second engine. And this is needed because now we need to reach velocity up to 28,000 kilometers per hour or 17,500 miles per hour. And so to do that, we need another engine that is going to boost the acceleration of the second stage to wherever we need to go. So for example, for geo orbits at 36,000 kilometers away, or to the moon, or sometimes even to other planets. And now this is the phase when things change depending on where we're going, depends on what altitudes we're going and what speeds we need to reach. We have then the SECO sequence, or the second engine cutoff. In this phase, the second engine gets detached from the body of the rocket, which is now just the payload really. And so this is variable because if we need to go in LEO orbit, so around 400 kilometers possibly, it will take us probably 1 day or 2 days max. But this moment is really depending on where we need to go in space. Because if we need to go to LEO, which is about 400 kilometers from Earth, where the astronauts are, for example, then that will take us 1 or 2 days. But if we need to go to the moon, for example, it may take us up to a week. And so this varies in time. It could be 1 week, 1 day, a few hours, depending. The very last phase of the launch sequence is the payload deployment. So the payload is something that we want to get into space, and that can definitely be astronauts, or it can be satellites or CubeSats or research projects from students or universities. Some launches companies, for example SpaceX, they provide you with space on their rockets, so you can purchase a space on the rocket to launch your payload into space. That is such a clever idea, because for universities, it means that they don't have to have a launch by themselves. They can just buy a small portion of that launcher, and so it becomes quite affordable, not cheap, but more affordable than usual. And for the launcher company, it's great because they have more reach and they can make more money. So quite a smart idea. And so the payload deployment can last a few hours or a few minutes, sometimes even days, depending on which orbits we need to target. It might happen that we need LEO orbits and then we need to go up a little bit. And so those are very complicated missions, but often it happens that we launch constellations. And so we stay in LEO orbits, so a low Earth orbit as mentioned before, and we launch more satellites throughout the orbit. And so that is a very clever way of saving time, space, and costs. Launching something into space is really expensive, and building something, for example, a satellite, is really, really expensive. And so space companies and launch companies will have to ensure that things work properly and rockets just don't blow up. Because imagine after working on a satellite for a year, more than a year, then the rocket just blows up and your satellite is gone. And even worse, if we have astronauts on the rocket, we need to apply even more stringent procedures. We need to ensure that the astronauts are safe. So launching something into space is complicated, but equally exciting and cool. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Mirko, this is Lunar Space, and until next time, stay curious and don't forget to subscribe for more space updates. Thank you.